an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Crooked Kingdom. Chapters 30, 31, and 32. Oh wait, and 33. In these chapters, I love this story so much, you guys. I knew that this was a setup, like I could smell it, but I really don't care. It was so much fun. I am here for it. And I am just like, I love this writer. And I love how we know enough about the backstory of all these characters, but she still manages to keep fleshing them out. It's really something. This book is good. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. So, first of all, of course, I want to say thank you to Jill for commissioning this episode. She bounces between commissioning these and commissioning Dark. So, two of my favorites. And I am... Oh, where to start on this? All right. So, all right, let's back it up. Let's go to chapter 30, which starts off... this is Kaz's perspective. And Kaz wakes up after resting and being a little bit tailored to heal him. But he is kind of thinking maybe he didn't go quite far enough because he resists tailoring too much for a few reasons. Then the first being that he has to look like he just got in a fight because that story is going to be circling everywhere and that's going to add a lot to his street cred. The second being that he is very private and the tailoring takes physical touch a lot of the time and he is not able to handle that well. And we get a really amazing series of, what's the word I want? Flashbacks, partially. They're not really, because flashbacks, I interpret that as being like you get thrown back in the story. Like you get thrown backward and you read it as if you were watching this happen in the moment. But the way that this is, it's more him like almost mentally like telling us what he went through and how he tried to overcome what's basically a disability, right? And the series of attempts that he has made. Now, I'm going to tell you all right now why I love this so much. It's not just because it deepens who Kaz is as a character. It's not just because I feel like it's helpful to know this in general for the story. It is because if you are somebody who has undergone a trauma and you're having a lot of trouble getting past it, you're going to, and I say going to, like this shit is absolutely unavoidable. You are going to come up against someone who tries to tell you how to overcome it, who thinks they know exactly what you should do. And they are going to make a series of the most obvious sort of assessments and suggestions, and it is going to make you want to strangle a person. Like, this is a direct sort of rebuttal, in my opinion, to those attempts. This is her telling us, here is what Kaz went through, and you already know that, and you know his reactions, and I bet you think, Well, I'm sure if he just took it slowly and attempted to increase his ability to stand it over time in bits and pieces rather than doing it all at once, that eventually he'd, quote, get better. And instead, she shows us how he did try that exact thing, because it really does not take a fucking genius to think of that method. This almost got him killed, and it almost cost him his entire reputation. Nothing about the methods that maybe we could apply to people today who live slightly easier lives in general than people in the barrel. Maybe these sorts of methodologies would work out. Maybe they would actually help and you would be able to move past. But generally, when we're talking about somebody trying to get past a trigger and sort of, stop having panic attacks or PTSD episodes, the methods are sort of supervised by a professional who understands trauma and who knows how to manage episodes and talks people through it. In this case, he is by himself. He is just trying to make it. And what his main goal is just be normal. And there's nobody looking out for him. There's nobody that's making sure that he's not completely losing his shit or panicking or anything. The one time that he pushes it a little too hard with trying to get past his hang up feels like way too cavalier a word, but I'll just say that. His hang up, it very nearly results in the person who is on his side, beating him to death. This is not the place where you can fucking play. This is not the place where you can test out how much you can take when other people are depending on you, and where your reputation as being tough and managing to get through in intense situations is half of what keeps you alive and keeps you making money. That's not an option here. So I absolutely fucking loved reading about his attempts to do this and how eventually, and the part of his attempts were motivated by this girl that he met and really liked, that he was attracted to, and who just had this vibe to her and seemed to be flirting with him. And he's sort of thinking, if he can get past this, maybe he could hook up with her and be like all of the other dudes that he hangs out with who are able to have relationships or at least have sex and not fucking pass out from it. But once he realizes, after that initial incident, I guess, once he realizes that what he is trying to do is either impossible or possible only at great costs that could potentially ruin him or kill him, he decides to sort of turn this into its own weapon. And he gets flirted with again by that woman and completely shuts her down, and uses the fact that he wears gloves, that he's extremely distant and does not like to be touched unless he's fighting, or that he has this just sort of mystique and an air of tragedy about him. He decides to use that for an advantage over everybody else and make this persona the intimidation tactic, the legend that follows him around. So I am really into both sorry guys, phone call just buzzed in. I am really into the exploration of what he tries to do. And once he realizes that he is not going to succeed easily, that this is actually going to be its own advantage. Advantage feels like the wrong word. I guess just that he can turn it to his advantage. It's not inherently an advantage, but he has to work with what he's got as a person. And so he's just sort of deciding that this is a weakness that some people could exploit if they really, figured it out. And what he needs to do is make it so that everybody is so afraid of him and so puzzled by him that this is going to be the main source of the fear that keeps people from attacking him in the first place and finding out that he has this vulnerability. I love it. It's great. It's great. So, okay, moving on. Let's talk about his meeting with what turns out to be the fucking Ravkin King. The, quote, privateer Stormhond, that's it. Kaz can sense immediately from the way that this guy talks that he is absolutely not a, quote, privateer. Like, this is not something that you can hide, apparently. I wonder if you can if you're a better actor. It doesn't feel like this guy is too concerned about hiding it is really the thing, because this sort of assessment that Kaz makes of, like, you don't speak the way you should feels obvious enough that you would think more people would pick up on it. So either people are, like, stupider than I think, or people are more willing to accept that a privateer would speak whatever way he feels like because maybe he is well traveled or whatever. Maybe this is maybe he thinks that just by intimidating with his the vibe of somebody being really educated, that can work for him. I don't know. But Kaz says immediately that this guy is, like, not who he says. And I love the fact that the dude is listening to Kaz's explanations as far as he can give explanations of how they busted this dude out of the fucking prison, the ice court, no less. And he realizes how much Kaz is leaving out. And he's just like, yeah, so this is obviously not the whole story. You clearly deal in lies and have-truths. And that makes you pretty much perfect for this job. So yeah, what's up? I adore it. I adore it. I adore it. Like, it's just one of those little moments that I should be used to by now with, like, it's sort of like the Addams Family, how anything terrible or ugly or whatever is turned into, like, a plus because they just have their... And that's sort of how this world is, where being, like, a liar and deceitful and half-truths and everything are a great thing. So I should have seen that coming, I guess, But I love that it's not set up like that. I love the fact that this is that this still came as a surprise to me, that it still made me, like, kind of giggle. And this dude, I have to think, is a character from another book. Like, he just feels so fully formed to me. But maybe not. I don't know. Maybe she was just thinking she would do a spinoff with him eventually. Who knows? But yeah, Kaz agrees to this deal and is, like, thinking back to himself about the fact that he made a fucking deal with a king just now. That this is serious shit. Like, there is just a lot that has happened for him in the past few weeks that has changed everything. So yeah, I'm super duper into everything about the way that this set of chapters opens up, because this book is actually pretty episodic. You know, there's a heist and then we have to figure out how to get out of it. And there's a heist and then we have to figure out the next step. And it's like, and I could see this all being a little tedious if another writer were handling it and didn't quite do it well. I feel like it would be really easy to fall into a rhythm that almost felt predictable. And I love that every time one of these like starts off, she gets into it more deeply with a different character that gives everything a new look in your mind, that gives new context to everything, so that when you get into another section that's another heist, as much as we just did a heist, you feel differently about it this time around because of the way that you see the characters involved with it. Does that make sense? So he's just kind of, you know, meditating on how far he has come. And when he thinks about like the beatdown that he took when he first like had his moment in the alley, it took him like weeks to recover his reputation after this. Like he had to rebuild from kind of nothing. And now look at him dealing with kings and making huge cons. Like the overall scope of what he's pulling off in these chapters is really remarkable. Also, there's a really wonderful moment where he's thinking of Geordie. And at one point, Jesper asks him who's Geordie, and Kaz says, he's somebody I trusted and somebody I didn't want to lose. Because, remember, he called Jesper by Geordie's name by accident. And he hears his brother's voice in his head saying, you failed me, you let him dupe you all over again. And now, it says now he could look back and see his brother's pride, his hunger for fast success. You failed me, Geordie. You were older. You were supposed to be the smart one. I love that. That's progress. It's a really difficult part of growing up. There's subtlety to everything. There's nuance to everything. It's never as simple as this was all your fault. But depending on your personality, you're somebody who takes responsibility for too much, or you're somebody who refuses to take responsibility for things. And you're somewhere on that spectrum, one end or the other, where everything you feel is somehow your fault and you're somehow responsible, or you feel like the victim put upon by the world and everybody else is fucking up around you and out to get you, or, you know, whatever. And Kaz has clearly been somebody who has taken on the guilt and responsibility for what happened to his brother in a way that is not healthy or rational or smart. And it's really difficult to get through the quagmire of that feeling, of that sort of the guilt, the regret, all of the I could have done this, I should have done that, and break through to a place where maybe you don't completely stop blaming yourself, but you're able to see that the other person has as much responsibility as you do in the situation, perhaps more. And you can still maybe feel like part of it is on me, and that might not ever go away. But finally being able to say, no, you know what? You were the one who was kind of in charge. Why do I feel guilty? That is a huge step. You know, I've run into that with talking about my parents and things that I have internalized and felt not even realizing that I took responsibility for as a literal child and felt like I needed to handle. And looking back, have always sort of felt like I should have done this or that. And then I'm like, no. Once you go through therapy and your therapist is like, what did you think you could have done? And they ask you just in bald terms, like, what could you change? What would you be able to change if you were to go back? And realizing like, this is not up to you. This is huge. you know? And he realizes that so much of the missteps that he has made over the course of his life have been because he was trying to get something that he couldn't ever have. And this is really sad because it's the sort of thing that's like, can't you? I still don't entirely believe this. But he thinks about how Pekka got them because it wasn't just about making money. He promised them a home. You know, he acted like a father. He had a wife who made them hot chocolate and acted like their mom. He had a daughter that Kaz could play with that felt like family. He made it seem like they could get back what they were going to lose. And he's sort of realizing that's what winds up destroying you, longing for something that you can never have. And the idea that he thinks that he can never have a home is heartbreaking. A home doesn't have to mean the same thing to everybody. You know, I still think that he can. But it seems like he feels he has to shut that whole part of himself down. So, anyway, he ends his chapter. They don't know who we are. Not really. They don't know what we've done, what we've managed together. So let's go and show them they picked the wrong damn fight. I love it. So then we go to Wylan. Now, for a moment, when Wylan gets abducted, I 100% believed that this was a setup and that Wylan was in on it. Then I turned the corner because his father was involved. And I was like, no, okay, I guess he really was captured. But I found it really hard to believe that he would be, what's the word I want? That it would be so easy to find out where he was. I just didn't really think that seemed like Kaz, you know, just hiding him in a bakery of all places, you know, especially because he wasn't with Jesper's father, which I felt like was kind of the giveaway for me, that if he was like supposed to be, because the way this chapter begins, it was they would abandon the hotel suite before dawn. It was imperative that if anyone came looking for Johannes Reitfeld after the auction, they would find him long gone. And that makes it sound like they need to like escort this man away. But here he's like totally by himself. And that was part of what was suspect to me, was the fact that he was all alone when he was taken and that there was no, you know, attempt to try and grab him earlier. And he's thinking to himself about what's going on with his father and how much his dad just wanted him to disappear. And he's telling himself, as he looks in the mirror, that he could vanish. Like, if he really wanted to, he could. But that he's not going to do that. That his father isn't going to win. That he isn't going to, what he thinks of as, abandon his mother. In general, he is sort of psyching himself up. And that was part of it for me as well, was suspecting this was a setup because it felt like somebody who was talking himself into a thing. And one could say it's just talking himself into this heist, but it didn't feel like he had the involvement in the actual workings of the heist itself. He was involved in the prep, but that was really it. So that didn't suit, right? But then, like I said, once we actually find his father is the one who supposedly sought him out and is questioning him, I was like, oh, I guess it is a real thing. Okay. And then towards the end of, or towards the beginning of the following chapter, because it says eventually he broke and told them everything, I was kind of like, it would work really well for this to be absolutely true. And for there to just be a tragic moment for a character who genuinely is trying his fucking best and cannot withstand torture, which is understandable because torture is probably something most people can't withstand, I would say. That's why people do it, because it works often. So I kind of was like mixed feelings about whether I even wanted it to be a setup, because as awful as it would have been, I'm not. And as much as I like Wylan as a character, and I don't want him gone, and I don't want Jesper to be heartbroken, which he would be, I'm not averse to the idea, narratively, of actually losing one of our close members of the crew. I feel like it ups the stakes to feel that everybody is in some kind of real danger, and that we're not all going to just sail through this and get out unscathed. So I was on board, in a way, with it not being a setup. But also, Jan Van Eyck is such a fucking cunt, dick, ball sack, moldering pile of fucking old tangerines that I really couldn't bear the idea of him getting the upper hand. So I had to go on with thinking that it was a setup for my own sanity as I continued to read this. So yeah, the sun had started to rise as Pym led Wylan and Colm out of the back of the hotel and through a series of confusing turns to the square that fronted the exchange. Ordinarily, the bakery on Burstraat would have been open at this hour, preparing to serve the traders and merchants on their way to the exchange. But the auction had upended ordinary business, and the baker had closed his shop, maybe hoping to secure a seat to watch the proceedings for himself. They stood at the door on the deserted square for an excruciatingly long moment as Pym fumbled with the lock. Wylan realized he'd gotten used to the dexterity with which Kaz managed breaking and entering. The door opened with a too loud jingle, and they were inside. So yeah, part of this was the fact that he, just gets put here. And the fact that it's he's being led here during the day, all of the way this all got my antenna up, as they say. They sat in silence for hours. Colm dozed, Wylan hummed to himself. He took a cautious peek out the window and saw a few people headed to the Church of Barter. Wylan didn't realize Colm was awake until he said, "What made you lie for my son that day in the tomb?" Oh my god, Colm is here. Why did I think Colm wasn't here? Guys, I was going and talking about this whole thing, and then it turns out I was wrong about this. I forgot about this whole conversation, because Wylan, basically, Jesper's father tells Wylan, "I like you, you seem like a good match for my son," and gives him his blessing, basically, which was the sweetest thing in the whole wide world. Oh, that's right. This is what it is. When he says stay hidden, that's what it was. Okay. Wylan tells Colm to stay hidden. That's why. Because I'm thinking he wasn't with him, but they had to make it look like he wasn't there. That's why. Okay. Thank God. I knew I wasn't crazy for having that theory. That's what it was. So yeah, he gets grabbed and brought over to his father, who basically promises him, "I'll give you money and I'll let you go off and live your life," and blah, blah, blah. And I'm so glad that Wylan never for a moment entertains this, even though he's part of a plan and whatever. He has learned who his father is. And there's not even a flicker, there's not a moment in which he sort of wonders if maybe he should do this. It's not, nothing. He just smooth, passes right on past that. The way you let mother live. His father's flinch was barely perceptible, a marionette yanked once by its strings, then allowed to return to rest. And he puts away his handkerchief and nods at the two bone breakers there, and it's just do whatever you need to. I want answers before the hour is up. And I just admire that so much. He knows Van Eyck. Even if Van Eyck were to keep him alive after, he would put him somewhere like a prison. And I can guarantee to like the 98th percentile that he would not keep him alive. Why the fuck would he do that? He literally tried to have Wylan killed once already. Of course he would kill him. Like, get out of here. Maybe we should snap your fingers so you can't play that infernal flute, Vanek suggested. I'm here for her, Wylan reminded himself. I'm here for her. In the end, he was not Nina, or Matthias, or Kaz, or Inej, or Jesper. He was just Wylan Vanek. He told them everything. And that last sentence fucking killed me for a second. Like, I really did think, oh my God, are we serious? Did he just fucking crack? Like, but then I started to go into denial and be like, nope. It's part of the setup. So then we go to Inej, who, for her part, is starting to notice the fact that there are no guards on the roof as she's making her way to her spot where she observes what's going on in the church/auction house, which really does say everything you need to know about their culture, that they are the same thing. And I love Inej's perspective because she is really bringing to the table the wild, like, theorizing and sort of assessments that we make all the time when we are expecting to come into a lot of money. It's really the sort of thing to me that feels really natural. She went through something horrific, and she is expecting a pretty good sum of money to be coming into her possession. And all she can think of is the variety of ways in which she could save people from the fates that she has endured or that she has seen happen in front of her. And this is all kind of triggered by Boyu Bayor being put up for auction. Because the way that he's examined, like a horse, is reminding her of what she went through when she first came to what's her name? Tata. Oh, I can't remember the name that she goes by. But there is something so wonderful about Inej and how much she just concerns herself with the welfare of everybody else and trying to stop what happened to her happening again. And she knows she can't save everybody, but she is really, like, daydreaming about all of the variety of possibilities and how she can leverage whatever money she gets to save as many people as she can. So she's placing explosives on the ceiling or on the roof of the cathedral so that if they need some kind of distraction, they can set them off, and they're very noisy, but they're not going to do a lot of damage, but it's meant to be just, a distraction. And she's sort of sickened by the fact that this is a church that's getting turned into an auction house. She's just really she holds things sacred in a real way. She is very serious about the worship of the gods that she is into. And the idea of sort of defiling a place of worship with commerce like this, and not just commerce, but indentured servants that are, as she is well aware, not necessarily consenting the way they appear to be. It's a lot for her. It's really gross, and I sympathize with her completely on that. And I'm not even a religious person. It's just the fucking principle of the thing. And she's saying to herself, Tante Helene, that's it. I was thinking Tante Helene, that's the name of the woman that took her. Kerch had been built on trade, but how much of that trade had been the humankind? A minister of Gezin might stand at that altar and rail against slavery, but how much of this city had been built on taxes from the pleasure houses? How many members of his congregation employed boys and girls who could barely speak Kerch, who scrubbed floors and folded laundry for pennies as they worked to pay off a debt that never seemed to grow smaller? Girl, preach. This is just fucking true today as it ever was. And she's waiting low-key, for Dunyasha to show up. She knows this bitch is around. She's like kind of thinking that Dunyasha might be watching her at this moment and just kind of waiting to strike. But she keeps looking around and she doesn't see her, and she doesn't even see like regular soldiers because she keeps expecting somebody to come up on the roof. Which it's like that was part of why I thought maybe this wasn't a setup. And they're really that smug and certain that they don't need to worry about posting guards because they know that she's up there, and they don't need to worry about stopping her because she isn't going to be able to play her part in the end anyway. But no, that does not seem to be what it was. Well, that is probably what it was. But it turns out that her looking around for guards is not that she doesn't know this was a setup, or maybe she doesn't. Maybe because it seems like Matthias doesn't when we see him next chapter. So maybe Kaz didn't let her in on it. I don't know. But yeah, she watches some dime lions walking in that have the fucking purple Stodwatch bands on their arms, which is meant to be a sign that they've been deputized. And they're really proud of themselves and strutting around. And meanwhile, the real Stodwatch is kind of looking over there and being like, ooh, I don't know about this whole thing. Like, we might have just done a little bit too much with this. Van Eck had started this dance with Rollins, but Inej doubted the King of the Barrel would let him lead for long, which, like, yeah. So by afternoon, the pews started to fill with curious onlookers, tradesmen in rough spun, jollies and bruisers fresh from the staves and decked out in their best barrel flash, flocks of black-clad merchers, some accompanied by their wives, their faces pale and bobbing above their white lace collars, heads crowned by braids. I love this. This is just so evocative, it just really sets the scene up for everything. And, of course, the Fjerdans come in, and they are humongous. And she is, even from where she's at, kind of intimidated by, like, how gigantic they are. In silver and white, bracketed by Druscale in black uniforms, all gilded hair and golden skin. Inej assumed that Matthias must know some of these men and boys. He would have served with them. What would it be like for him to see them again now that he'd been branded a traitor? I love what it's like for him, by the way, when we get there. But I'll talk about that in a second. Nobody, by the way, is allowed to bring weapons in here. So they all have to sort of leave their stuff at the door. At one point, the Zemeni come in. They were just as tall as the Druscale, but leaner of build. Some bronze like her, others the same deep brown as Jesper. Some with heads shorn, others with hair in thick braids and coiled knots. There, tucked between the last two rows of the Zemeni, Inej caught sight of Jesper. For once he wasn't the tallest person in a crowd, and with the collar of his waxed cotton duster turned up around his jaw and a hat pulled low over his ears, he was nearly unrecognizable. Or so Inej hoped. So then, the Ravkins come, and this has to be the legendary Sturmhond. He's in a teal fucking frock coat. I just love this fucking guy. I really do. And he is sort of seen as a joke by everybody here because it's well known that the Ravkins don't have any fucking money. So once he starts making these wild bids later on, everybody's looking at them like, what the fuck? Like, where are they getting this money from? Which winds up for a moment seeming to lend some credence to the accusations that Van Eck makes about them colluding with Kaz. But, of course, as we know, that winds up getting turned around pretty quickly. So, the Fjerdans and Sturmhond, and all of the Ravkins, to be fair, butt heads for a minute here. And I love this line. One of them calls Sturmhond a preening, ridiculous peacock. You stink of Grisha foulness. Sturmhond sniffed the air. I'm amazed you can detect anything over the reek of ice and inbreeding. Woo! Woo! Love it. You love to see it. So everybody's like getting seated, and the shoe delegation comes in, and they like expect to be seated in the front, and they got there a little bit too late, and they missed out on sitting in the front. And finally, Van Eck like gets up there and is just like, y'all decided you wanted to make a big entrance and have some drama, and you pay for that by not getting seated up here. Deal with it. It's fine. The rest of the crowd was crackling with murmurs and speculative glances. Most of them didn't know what Kuwei was worth, or had only heard rumors of the drug known as Jorda Parem, so they were left to wonder why a shoe boy had drawn such bidders to the table. The few murchers who had seated themselves in the front pews with the intention of placing a bid were exchanging shrugs and shaking their heads in bafflement. Clearly, this was no game for casual players. So yeah, they were going to place a bid, and now they're kind of like, oh, well, maybe not, actually. So then the doors open, and who fucking comes in but Kaz, flanking Kuweyubo on one side and Matthias on the other. I keep calling him Bulyaweyor, that's his dad. Matthias wore simple tradesman's clothes, but managed to look like a soldier on parade nevertheless. With his black eye and split lip, Kaz looked even less reputable than usual, despite the sharp lines of his black suit. So immediately everybody sees Kaz, who's like wanted all across the city, and they all start to flip out. The sanctity of the auction would protect Kaz and Matthias, but only until the final gavel fell. Even so, neither of them seemed remotely concerned. They walked with backs straight and eyes forward, Kuwei safely wedged between them. And Kuwei, for his part, is being screamed at by the shoe. And it's never translated what that is, but Kuwei seems really affected by it, and I would imagine that they're calling him some kind of traitor. So the bidding begins, and it starts at 1 million Kruge. It is serious. 1 million. Right away. Right out of the gate. Like, Lord. And they quickly get loaded all the way up until, what was it? We get to 40 million and things start to, it seems, cool off a little bit. Until the shoes start to get fucking irritated. Because as far as they are concerned, this dude is theirs. And that he has no right to be auctioning himself off. Like, they seem to feel really proprietary about him. And the fact that everybody is dicking around and not letting them win when they know they have a right to him in their minds is bullshit. So they just, like, jump from that, like, 40 to 90. They're just kind of like, you know what? Bullshit. Get out of here. We get to 110, 120. And 120 is what Sturmhond says. And then all of a sudden, they are interrupted. The doors of the church fly open, and a wave of seawater comes rushing in and vanishes in a cloud of mist. 15 figures cloaked in blue filed inside, their robes billowing as if captured by an invisible wind, their faces obscured by mist. "We are the Council of Tides," said the blue-cloaked figure in the lead, a female voice, low and commanding. The mist shrouded her face completely, shifting beneath her hood in a continuously changing mask. "This auction is a sham." Meanwhile, up on the roof, Inej realizes that this is the fucking signal, and instinctively dodges left, and just as she does it, a blade, like, slices past her and into her arm a little bit, and Dunyasha is there, and says, "That was a warning. I will look you in the eye when I send you to your death." Inej reached for her knives. Her shadow demanded an answer. And we don't get to find out what happened there, which I, for one, do not care for, just saying. So, Matthias, he, bless his heart, is not in on this and does not realize this is what Kaz wants to happen. Once he is described as being impossible to read And Matthias, for his part, never does know what Kaz is thinking. But there was something about that, for me, confirmed the fact that this was all meant to be, that this was what Kaz had orchestrated. He was keenly aware of the council members seated behind him, a flock of black-suited ravens squawking at one another, each louder than the next, all but Van Eck, who had settled deeply into his chair, his fingers tented before him, a look of supreme satisfaction on his face. So this is what makes Matthias think that, of course, Van Eck has the upper hand now. Why would he look this satisfied? Why would he be so smug? Why would Pekka position himself so that Kaz could see him unless he felt like he was making a really good play here? And he's thinking about the fact that the last time the Council of Tides was seen was 25 years before. It says, to protest the proposed destruction of one of the obelisk towers to create a new shipyard. When the vote had not gone in their favor, they'd sent a huge wave to crush the Stad Hall. The council had reversed themselves, and a new Stad Hall had been erected on the old site, one with fewer windows and a stronger foundation. Matthias wondered if he would ever grow used to such stories of Grisha power. Here comes the part that I love. It's just another weapon. Its nature depends on who wields it. He would have to keep reminding himself. The thoughts of hatred were so old they had become instincts. That was not something he could cure overnight. Like Nina with Parem, it might well be a lifelong fight. Guys, this is what it looks like to fight your biases. And you will never, ever absolutely win. That's the thing that sucks. You can get to a point where you most definitely are having a different instinctual reaction the majority of the time. But your biases are going to rear their ugly heads here and there. And you just have to recognize when that's happening and tamp it down and replace that instinct with something better. And that's my favorite, my favorite exercise is realizing, oh God, I just thought this thing. And having to sort of examine that for a second and be like, this is why I think this, and this is not fair or right or based on anything. So I am going to back off and replace it with this. And I love the fact that Matthias is doing this work and that he recognizes the gut reaction he has when he thinks about Grisha power and what they've done in the past. He feels in himself a hatred and a fear. He knows that it's not correct. He knows that somebody he loves is capable of this stuff. He knows that they are being persecuted unfairly, but it's still there, And not only does he have this moment with himself of thinking about his reaction to things, but he looks over at the Druskel who are watching him because he's a traitor, and they are all disgusted with him. It says, one boy glared at him from the first row, quivering with fury, eyes like glaciers, hair so blonde it was nearly white. What wounds had his commanders exploited to put that look in his eyes? Matthias held his gaze steadily, taking the brunt of his rage. He could not hate this boy. He'd been him. Eventually, the ice-haired boy looked away. What wounds had his commanders exploited to put that look in his eyes? Y'all, if that isn't a word right there, that is some shit. And this reminds me a great deal. There's, if y'all have watched Deadwood, I'm going to spoil a moment in the movie here, but it's very small. But there is a young girl who comes to town to work at the Gem, which is a whorehouse. And she is very young. She's probably 16. And Trixie, who is, 30-something, sees her and asks her, do you think that God meant for you to be a whore? Or something like this. And the girl responds, I reckon it's what I'm fit for. And Trixie says, how hard do you think the man who turned you out had to work to make you believe that? I love that line. And when she says it, she doesn't try and just say, you're fit for more than that. She doesn't try and convince this girl to change her, her deeply held belief of what she's worth. Instead, she turns it around and says, you believing this was to someone else's advantage. Do you want to keep playing into that? And that is something that people are more capable of understanding right away. Really believing you're worth more. That takes a long time. Believing that somebody exploited you for their own gain is much easier to understand and believe. So this framing of this kid having had some kind of wound that people in charge knew about and got in there and opened up to use that pain, that is exactly how this shit works. And I love that Matthias looks at this kid and sees himself and sees not somebody that's an enemy, but somebody not even to be pitied, but to have compassion on. Because this kid is being used. And yes, he is inherently dangerous. Obviously, this is a young dude with weapons training who could wreak havoc. Yes, but also it's sad. And also, this kid is a weapon himself and doesn't even know it because he hasn't got the context. I love Matthias in this. I said from the beginning how much I loved his character and that he might be one of my favorites. And I feel that way still because I feel like he's done the most growing out of everybody except maybe Wylan. He has come the farthest in really turning around everything that he believes. And that's hard, man. That is that's a lifelong exercise, as he says. So the tide makers, the Shu, try and stop them and tell them this is, sanctioned by the government. This is totally, you can't disrupt this at this point. And then they say that these proceedings have been compromised. And at this point, of course, Van Eck is assuming that the Council of Tides has figured out what he has figured out, and they're here to reveal the same information that he has, but with much more drama, I guess, with a much more pizzazz. And he says, Wylan took quite a beating before he gave you and your friends up. I never knew the boy had so much spine. Meanwhile, the tide maker is saying a false fund was created to swindle honest merchants out of their money. That money was funneled to one of the bidders. Of course, said Van Eck in mock surprise. The Ravkins. We all knew they didn't have the funds to bid competitively at such an auction. We're aware of how much money the Ravkin crown has borrowed from us. Brecker must be working for them. And of course, everybody immediately starts to jump on this. And Matthias is like, aren't you going to do something? And Kaz is just kind of like, no. So finally, the tides have to bring another wave in to silence everybody and say the Ravkins have nothing to do with this. The money was transferred to the Shu. Van Eck blinked, then changed tack. Well, then Brecker struck some kind of deal with the Shu. Instantly, the Shu were shouting their denials, but the tidemaker's voice was louder. The false fund was created by Johannes Rietveld and Jan Van Eck. Van Eck's face went white. No, that's not right. Rietveld is a farmer, stammered Carl Dryden. I met him myself. The tidemaker turned on Dryden. Both you and Jan Van Eyck were seen meeting with Rietveld in the lobby of the Geldrenner Hotel. And Van Eyck thinks, a bunch of other people also met with this guy. Why are you picking on us? But everybody else is like, no. We were meeting with that dude. We came to the hotel to see a presentation on Zemeni oil futures. It was weird, but this guy, his name is not ringing any bells. So they have been led to think they were getting in on a deal, on a, some sort of like scheme that everybody was getting in on, when in fact what everybody was coming to that hotel for had nothing to do with what they talked about with Rietveld, aka Kolm. Sorry. We knew nothing of this, countered the shoe ambassador. Now this I'm not sure about. Why it was that the shoe have been like lumped in with this thing. I don't know if there's like a particular reason for that, or if it's meant to make the shoe angry with Van Eyck so they will be even more antagonistic towards him, or what. And Kaz, for his part, like, Van Eyck mentioned something about, Kaz being seen with his wife who was abducted, and Kaz is like, I retrieved her from the market square like you asked me to. And when he's like, well, isn't this the guy that kidnapped you, to his wife, Alice is just like, I didn't see them. And they were all wearing masks. Like, she can't confirm this. And then he says something about, well, my son then. And at that moment, Weiland reveals himself. He's like, I'm right here, Father. And there is this wonderful moment where Van Eyck is like, motherfucker, I can't believe these guys can't do their jobs. And Kaz is like, oh, can't they? Because you don't really seem aware of what their job was. And he's like, wait, what? And of course, there's this moment where Van Eyck realizes how everything was a huge setup, and that he doesn't know the barrel or its inhabitants well enough to tell Dime Lions and Dregs apart. So he thought that he was dealing with Dime Lions who were on his side, and in fact they were just Dregs with the armbands and the fake tattoos, and they had been put in place for him. Meanwhile, Weiland is like, he says about like that he broke free from Rollins, that Pekka Rollins took him captive, and Van Eyck is like, get out of here, stop it, tell them about the Rovkins. And Weiland says, I'll say whatever you want, Father, just don't let them hurt me anymore. And everybody realizes that what that implies, that he was being hurt on his father's orders. And I love this because I am like, this is not at all true what they're saying happened, but what Van Eyck is actually responsible for is so much worse than this, that it's barely what he even deserves at this point. So there's all these things about him, like, Kaz being at the house and breaking in, that he can explain. Van Eyck invited us there to broker a deal for Kuei Bo's indenture. He told us we'd be meeting with the Merchant Council. Pekka Rollins was waiting to ambush us instead. And a couple other people who were at the dinner saw Kuei Bo and are like, oh, yeah, actually, that would make sense, because we did see him. At the time, we didn't know who he was, but there was a young shoe boy with him. And then, finally, Carl Dryden is, like, thinking to himself about how Van Eyck was so pushy about getting into Rietveld's fund, and says, oh my God, you were the secret buyer that he was talking about. And meanwhile, Kaz in the corner is like, finally. I love how he's just fucking waiting for somebody to put the damn pieces together. Meanwhile, Van Eyck is like, I would never swindle my friends and neighbors. And the judge, I'm saying that because he has a gavel, but he's really just the auctioneer, says, Jan Van Eck, at the very least, you have squandered the resources of this city in pursuing unfounded accusations, because he has no evidence that Kaz was the one who abducted his wife, that Kaz was the one who abducted, in quotes, his son. At the worst, you have abused your position as a councilman, attempted to defraud your friends, and violated the integrity of this auction. This auction has been compromised. It cannot go on until we have determined whether any members of the council knowingly channeled funds to one of the bidders. And everybody, of course, starts to flip out. The Druskel start to head towards the stage, and the Stodwatch has to block them. The Tide Makers raise their hands and act like they are going to be summoning another wave, and then all of a sudden, a siren goes off, and everybody stops dead. And I'm realizing that I totally did not leave time to talk about what happens next. But I've read chapter 34 as well. I said that it was up until 33, but I lied to you. But what is happening is that Nina is using the dead cells from the corpse that she went and saw at the morgue with Kaz earlier. And it takes a lot for Kaz to go down there. He almost faints several times. And she uses those dead cells to basically infect people with what looks like plague or mortification of some kind, which they will be able to recover from. They will be able to get it removed. It is not actually dangerous. But this sets off the plague siren, which this is one of the only things that this entire city is afraid of. And honestly, this is a pretty action heavy chapter, so it doesn't take that much to talk about. Because it's pretty short. But she says that she was thinking about what Kaz has said. I know the one thing the city is more frightened of than the Shu, the Fjerdans, and all the gangs of the Barrel put together. Kaz had gotten it right. The barricades, the blockades, the checks on people's papers, all of it would be abandoned in the face of the plague. Of course, none of these people were properly sick. The necrotic flesh would not spread beyond what Nina had grafted onto their bodies. They would have to have it removed, but no one would grow ill or die. At worst, they'd endure a few weeks of quarantine. And she can't help but realize, how infectious the mood of the city has become, because everybody's panicking. There's just hysteria. And she knows it's not real, but she can't help feeling it, as a result of being around everybody. And she's just thinking over this new ability that she has to, handle death, basically. And that part of her has been wanting to reject the whole idea, but another part of her is you know what? Maybe this is Gel, her god, just showing me another way. And I have no doubt that being able to handle something totally differently than most other Grisha, it will be an advantage at some point, And I don't mean that this wasn't an advantage, what she just did, because most definitely it is. But it's just probably going to continue to pay off and be really good up against specific enemies and things. Meanwhile, she's feeling way more energetic. She can breathe more easily. Her muscles don't ache anymore. Her appetite has come back, and the craving for Parem is barely noticeable. And she's realizing that using her magic in this way actually is healing her. And it ends with the sentence, she was the queen of mourning, and in its depths she would never drown. So yeah, this is pretty cool. So that's the last chapter. So I'm going to wrap this up because I'm over time, but I'm glad I at least got to talk about most of that. It's pretty short. And thank you again to Jill for commissioning this. I really enjoy this book. Thank you all so much for listening, and I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.